Hello again, friends. Major Dave here with the latest update on my research into the election returns from last November. It's now been 6.5 long months since the election, and I hope by now you've seen the other 3 videos that I posted on my YouTube channel. You can find those at www.youtube.com/MajorDaveNC. It's all about those election results and how this whole mess first got started. But this segment is not only an update on those findings, but a summary of the much broader range of findings and conclusions that I've reached, and the recommendations for corrective action needed to restore the integrity of our election system here in North Carolina. Now, frankly, I've been astounded by what I've discovered, and I imagine you will be too. It's complicated, it's complex, it's confusing, but most of all, folks, it's criminal. What I've discovered is far beyond what anyone to date has ever described as voter fraud in North Carolina. So for the next few minutes, I want you to set aside everything you ever thought you knew about voter fraud. You know, the stories of felons voting, vans and buses full of people making the rounds of the precincts, impersonating other voters, are in many cases true. But what I've discovered shows that while they are relevant parts of this story, they are just so much smoke and mirrors. They're just to distract us from the real frauds taking place. You know, in many ways, it's like the illusion magicians use to perfect their craft. It's a blend of distraction, substitution, and camouflage. Now let's face it, it's simple human nature to see most easily what we expect to see. And those who have manipulated the data have taken full advantage of it. They rely on our need to believe that our system is just fine and works like it should. Now, I should reiterate that I have done this solely on my own time and my own dime, and not on behalf of any organization or political party. No one has directed me in any way, and more importantly, no one's compensated me in any way for what I've done. I am merely a citizen like you, deserving of answers, who knew there had to be more to this story than what we were being told by the media or the Board of Elections. You know, it's actually been easier to go it alone because I could follow any lead wherever it led without seeking permission or approval. Now, let me say from the outset that there's no way to put a video like this together to make the case, to do the topic justice, and still keep it short. Nor is there any way that I can make the graphics readable on a handheld device. So I strongly recommend that you watch this video when you have a large screen and about 40 minutes to take it all in. I think you'll find it well worth your time. I just hope that your time has been worth my time. You know, if something doesn't make sense at first blush, well, welcome to the club. Feel free to pause it and back it up to watch any portion again to make sure it all sinks in. Now, as a former military police investigator during my enlisted years, and later on as an officer when I was a project manager for a 7-figure defense automation contract, I've merely applied my training and experience to see what indicators there might be of any wrongful activity at any level or phase of our elections processes. Now, by now you've likely heard the number of registered voters who show up on the rolls as being 100 years old or older, but they only appear to be that age even when they aren't. So I have to eliminate as many curiosities as I can. You see, back when records were converted from paper over to automated data, the default date of birth of January 1st, 1900 was used if none was on file for that voter. That makes many of them appear to be today 116 or 117 years old. So we actually have data inaccuracies built into the system. But it still doesn't explain here the voter I found who is 241 years old or the one who is 219 years old. Now, friends, if you're 241 years old, your birth year was 1776. Now, that's likely someone's idea of a joke, but this database is no place for games. You know, my point here is that they have not made use of the most basic constraints on data entry, such as drop-down menus, to prevent these out-of-range values from even being entered in the first place. Now, I've found dates appearing in multiple formats within the same field of data, and even within the same county's data is shown here. Now, folks, that just doesn't happen in a relational database. I have found an unusual number of provisional ballots that were not counted because the record says they were, quote, missing from the envelope. Now, these records highlighted here show that 4 black females who all live at the same address and voted at the same place on the same day all had their ballots mysteriously disappear. Now, given the address, they are likely students and roommates attending Elizabeth City State University. And yes, they're all registered Democrats. But their ballots disappeared. Now, I've found nursing and rehab facilities where most every voter living there who requested an absentee by mail ballot later voted in person at one stop. And I can conclude from their ages, the dates involved, and their inherent mobility issues, especially in the rehab facilities, this is highly unlikely to have happened the way the record indicates. You know, in one report I downloaded, it says no one voted curbside in Wake County either during early voting or on election day. Now, I witnessed it in person, so I know it happened. But this is the result when you are calling ballots one thing in one file or stage of the process and something different in another. Now, as this slide shows, according to the same results file, when also sorted by voting method, that only one person voted curbside in Durham County. Now, I'm going to talk more about this later when I address the issue of ballot bundling. Frankly, it's kind of like money laundering. You know what drug cartels do with their dirty money? You mix the dirty money in with clean money and it disappears. I found that 2 ballots, only 2, out of 4.7 million actually have their own unique ballot status. And one says simply, eligible, did not vote. Folks, if they didn't vote, why is it in the record anyway? And the other simply says, absentee, not mail or one-stop absentee, just absentee. I mean, are they making this stuff up as they go along? The record says that one person who voted in November actually cast their ballot 16 years ago in 2001. No data control. Multiple records show absentee by mail ballots being requested as far back as 2012 and in each year since for the 2016 contest. No data control. Now, in this example, we see several folks in Buncombe County whose last name has been replaced with the word true, and it's even centered in that field. And this is far from the only instance of it. No data control. You know, if you want to hide a name in a database, spell it BR0WN or J0NES. You can search all day for Brown and Jones and they won't pop up, but they're there. I've even found the date of birth digits combined with the middle name. Now, it would be a violation of their privacy to actually show you that here, but it's there for anyone to look at who looks at the public record like I did. And these are just samples of the hundreds of errors and anomalies I've detected, largely just from casually scrolling down through the spreadsheets of data I downloaded from the election archives. The data corruption is pervasive and inexcusable. You know, folks, if I can find all of this that easily, it surely begs the question of why those being paid to manage this system can't, don't, or won't do the same. We've been designing and improving it for over 12 years now, and after spending hundreds of millions of dollars on it, this is the best we have to show for it, and frankly, it's shameful. So let's dig a little deeper. Now, and I'll set the stage. I discovered early on there are 2 different sets of numbers that we deal with in election accounting and tabulation. Now, on the front end are the registered voters and the numbers of ballots cast. And on the back end are the candidates running and the number of votes awarded. Now, we'd like to think there's a direct link between the 2, but I'm going to show you how that lack of a link invites corruption. Now, this is critical now because the lack of a direct connection between the two is what on one hand protects us from anyone finding out digitally whom we voted for. Yet on the other hand, it's the greatest weakness in our system that offers the widest range of what I'll call, just for the sake of discussion, opportunities for mischief. Now, these systemic weaknesses in the design of their automated system, and I'll get to it more specifically in a minute, and the way in which these processes interact with each other not only allow for the data manipulation, it doesn't catch it when it happens. And it also makes it impossible to detect unless you know what you're looking for and, of course, actually bother to. You see, it occurred to me, if those vans and buses were making the rounds, how did they know which precincts to visit and which voters' names to use? Now, I know from first-hand experience that on election day, certain groups or campaigns were being provided with lists every few hours of who had not yet voted. Therefore they could go crank up their phone banks and encourage people to get out and vote. And that's all fine, well and good, unless that same list became a route map and a by-name roster for those vans and buses full of impersonators. Now, this is key because if you want to alter the outcome digitally later on, you have to have enough gross front-end numbers to justify the net back-end numbers you need to win in the results. And this is what ultimately proved to me that there was fraud. Of course, the other way is to simply upload backdated ballot records during the canvass to cover votes being added in afterwards. Major Dave, that's ridiculous, you say. Well, perhaps. And I thought so too at first until I began uncovering an increasing amount of evidence pointing to exactly that. So that's why I kept digging even deeper into these reports. I spent literally the whole month of April scrolling down through the absentee file. And I got through the first 500,000 lines or so of the 3.2 million lines, and this covered our counties alphabetically from Alamance through Cherokee. Now that's 20 counties or 1/5 of the state. So it's fairly representative. And folks, over 3,500 voters in just those counties had more than one transaction listed for them. Many showed that they initially requested an absentee by mail ballot, but later voted in person at one stop, or had to make multiple requests for by mail ballots. And I'm sure many of them did vote. They request an absentee ballot because I travel a lot in my work. I may not be able to make it. Oh, I'm home today, I can go vote. And they do. But what I discovered is the kind of thing that you can't see just by looking at one voter's record at a time. Now, I'm not saying that they voted more than once. I'm just saying that they had to make, in some cases, as many as 4 requests for a by-mail ballot before one was ever sent to them. 5,073 requests were never fulfilled. The record simply shows no action was taken. And if you were white, female, Republican, and over 55 years old, you were the most likely to be ignored. So now, let's take the family of 3, and yes, I'm presuming that based on the common address, common last name, their ages and genders, that I was looking at a father, mother, and son. And again, you can see this when you put the records together. As all 3 requested their ballot be sent to the same address in England. And yet the son has a second line showing that he later voted here in person at one stop. Doesn't that sound a bit odd? Now, certainly it could have happened, but there are clues here not just in the dates of those transactions, but in the sequence of the records. You see, relational databases are organized in what I call FIFO, first in, first out. Data added to the file later is appended to the end of the file, not inserted somewhere in the middle. They use indices or pointers to link related data together into a composite record. But when you output that data, unless you sort it in a defined way, the records will come out in the order they were entered. Hence, the evidence of backdated records being added in much later. Now again, surely it's not impossible that the son didn't vote back here, at home. But friends, this is the type of voter most easy to impersonate, and the one-stop vote automatically cancels out any ballot that may have been submitted by mail. What, you didn't know that? I didn't either. But I found that if you mail in a ballot and someone else shows up at one stop and votes in your name, the by-mail ballot can be spoiled and the in-person ballot accepted in its place, even if it's not you. And friends, without photo voter ID, there's no way to stop it. Now, before I go on, and since I'm actually using real people's names and personal information, I remind everyone that this data is all a matter of public record. So no one's privacy is being violated by my showing it. But more importantly, I'm not accusing anyone I might name here of any wrongdoing, since it's just quite likely that the mischief was done by someone else merely using their name and registration information. The presumption of innocence is and must be sustained. You know, if they go back in and check their own voter history later online, they will still see that a ballot was accepted in their name, and if it says one stop instead of by mail as the method of voting, it stands to reason they'd be told, well, it's just merely a clerical error and nothing more would likely come of it. It would appear, for all intents and purposes, to be a case of no harm, no foul. But it can actually serve to mask the very ballot substitution I believe the record shows is taking place on a large scale all across the state. Welcome to the age of electronic ballot box stuffing. These are the systemic weaknesses of the type I've discovered that afford the opportunity for ballot laundering that keeps the count right on the front end but changes the outcome on the back end contrary to each voter's choice. You know, I've got spreadsheet upon spreadsheet of similar data across multiple counties, but I quickly discovered that the rates of such multiple transactions also vary widely among those counties. You know, some counties just have cases by the hundreds, while others just have a handful. And there's no correlation either between the incident rate and the county size or voter population. And still, the more I dug, the more curious things became. Now let's take the case of a voter named Jared Wicker. The report says he voted twice in November, both times via email from Australia, once in Orange County and once in Durham County. And as you can see, when I looked him up in the state voter database online, it shows only one record for him in Durham County. That suggests he's never been registered to vote in any other county, including Orange. Yet, his voter history, as you see here, clearly shows he's voted in Orange County in person in several past elections. But the search of the database turns up only one record for him in Durham County, and his status there is shown currently as removed. But where's the record showing him removed from Orange County? I mean, it beats me, but it isn't there. So let's go back and take a closer look at the Durham record. The date of registration there is shown as November 11th, 2016. Folks, that's 3 days after the election. And I ask you, what kind of nonsense is that? How could anyone sign up and vote after the election has already taken place and now show up as removed? You know, even same-day registration doesn't allow for that. And yet both ballots were counted. Now, in fairness, I find it equally plausible that Jared Wicker did not vote at all this time, but rather two counties in need of a convenient name found one in their local records and coincidentally just chose the same name to use. This is all easy to verify. Just go to the North Carolina State Board of Elections website, plug in his name in the voter absentee lookup tool as I did. But friend, this garbage is what our system still allows. It's enticing, it's curious, it's engaging, it's fascinating, and even frustrating to me when you try to make sense of it. But it's all still just smoke and mirrors to cover the real fraud. Now, I go back to my earliest days in the military as a military policeman, and you're taught in any law enforcement training class that the 6 questions you have to answer in any investigation are who, what, when, where, why, and how something was done. And frankly, most of this and most of the current public discussion has focused for the most part on the who. But that involves only those front-end numbers. But if someone was trying to fudge the numbers, there had to be a way they were doing it. And knowing how and when they did this would offer clues as to the real who that was behind it. I mean, who has the access and the capability to exploit these weaknesses to their advantage? Questions like these demand answers. Motive and opportunity remain at the top of the list, and of course motive is the easy part. Opportunity remains elusive. It's just simply beyond my means, since I don't know who has what login credentials in every county of the state, or at the state level for that matter, and what type of access they have. Actually, most any kid today with any kind of computer training has the skills to modify these records if they have the right access. So then I began to take a look at the back-end numbers. So I went to the results file where it lists each candidate in the race and the number of votes they got in each precinct in each county. This is the part I don't think anyone has ever seriously looked at before. The first thing I discovered is that the numbers reported in the results file do not match up with the official numbers certified as the results. In fact, as you see here, of the 38 candidates on the ballot statewide, only 2 have the exact same number of votes accounted for in the results file as was officially blessed by the State Board of Elections. The Sean Hall, the Libertarian candidate who ran for the Senate against Burr, and Walter Smith, the Democrat who challenged Steve Troxler for Ag Commissioner. All the others had slightly more or slightly less than the official results claimed, and in truth none of it was enough to change the outcome of their contest. But folks, shouldn't this all balance like a checkbook? You know, it's not my numbers versus theirs. It's their numbers versus theirs, and they don't add up. And we cannot simply dismiss this as just another no harm, no foul situation. I mean, where did either set of numbers come from if they didn't come from the other file? But Major Dave, not everyone votes for every race on the ballot, and that would be true. But their system tracks overvotes, which is voting for more candidates in a race than you're allowed, and also undervotes, leaving a contest blank. Now that pool of undervotes represents thousands of ballots across the state whose numbers can be digitally reassigned to candidates at will on the back end to achieve a different outcome by anyone with the right access. But still, the final totals as reported and certified should be consistent with the data in the reports from which they were allegedly tabulated, and they simply aren't. Now, we can argue chicken and egg all day long about which numbers come from which source, but that doesn't change the blatant inconsistency between the two. Now, secondly, and much to my surprise, I discovered that in late February of this year, every single election archive record going back to 2004 was showing a date modified for that file of February 13th of this year. Not only have the files been modified, they've all been renamed. What was once absentee underscore 11XX08XX 2016 is now showing up as absentee underscore 2016 1108. Now here's the screen grab from the 2004 document listing showing the February dates. And now here is the 2016 record. And you see the same in every other election set. Now perhaps the name change was the only modification that caused the file to be shown as modified. But someone needs to look very deeply into this. Who did it? When did they do it? And most importantly, why did they do it? This is an unprecedented and wholesale alteration of the public record on a massive scale. Now, I submit no one would make such an effort, clearly, to change the record unless they were covering something up. I mean, it can only mean there was something in those past files they didn't want to come out because they knew what it would mean to their scheme if it did. And to make matters worse, I even got a security warning when I visited their website, since the records are now stored in the cloud. They're not even stored locally here in North Carolina, as far as I know, on state-owned equipment. They rent space in the cloud. The server's security certificate was invalid and couldn't prove it was legitimate. Now, can you imagine just how much of all of this they would ask us to dismiss and disregard if they just simply came out and said, we got hacked? Well, nice try, folks, but the files I worked from were downloaded well before February of this year. I just don't have the capability of comparing the two files side by side to detect any changes. But for the sake of argument here, what I am reporting is what was already in the real files immediately following the election. Now, I could spend hours showing you the whole 3-inch binder that I've compiled. It's full of graphs, numbers, charts, spreadsheets. I'm not going to waste my time or yours, since frankly internet viewing of clips such as these rarely exceeds 5 minutes. And much of it would be redundant, but I'm sure more than a few have already clicked off and left us by now. Too boring, too confusing, but hey, if you're still here with me, then we are the ones who can hope to make a real difference going forward. The documentation is all here to rebut anyone's challenges to my methods or conclusions. Folks, this isn't rocket science. For the most part, it's just math. And it gives you the backup for the arguments that we all need to be making to get an appropriate criminal investigation underway. There isn't a single number that I've reported on or referenced or posted anywhere on social media that I don't have a piece of paper or a file downloaded from the State Board of Elections to back up. Still, hang in there with me for a few more minutes because this gets better. It gets much better. So, getting back to the results file. Now, my critics might suggest that I simply overlooked or missed a few lines of total somewhere along the way, and that's surely a possibility. But friends, there's no line of data, or any group of them for that matter, that I could have overlooked or skipped in that file that would have given a candidate more votes than was officially certified, and yet that's exactly what we have here. I didn't add up the totals the State Board of Elections did. I just used their numbers and thought I was calculating them the same way they did from the same data that they did. Again, it isn't a matter of my numbers not matching theirs. This is a case of their own numbers not matching each other. But what their final numbers do say, and this is where it really gets interesting, is that between November 15th, a week after the election, and December 13th, when the results were made official, a total of 50,846 additional votes were added to the totals in the governor's race between the three candidates, and of course slightly less in the other council state races, allowing for typical down-ballot drop-off. I mean, that's quite common to see some additions because provisional ballots are not counted until after the election when they're inspected and verified during the canvass. Additionally, military members and civilians living abroad voting absentee by mail are given an extra 10 days following the election to have their ballot received back here at home and be counted. So the question then becomes, where did those 50,000 ballots come from? When were they cast? And who cast them? Now, as you can see here, I broke down the absentee and provisional reports by date to show what date those late arriving ballots were accepted and counted. I can total only 36,859 ballots being counted following the election according to their data. That's 26,889 provisional ballots that were accepted during the canvass and 9,970 ballots that arrived by mail and were accepted after Election Day. That's what their record says. But folks, that's a shortfall of 13,987 ballots, far more than enough to change the outcome of those races that surprised us all. Now, I've given the data the benefit of the doubt that all the provisional ballots were not counted until late in November, since there's no actual date of acceptance shown for each of those ballots. But we do know that they were counted during the canvass, which was roughly the last 2 weeks in November. Now, this is critical because this is where Roy Cooper's lead moved beyond the 10,000 vote threshold to avoid an automatic recount and force Governor McCrory's concession around November 29th. Now, to make matters worse, I have their absentee voter report from November 6th showing how many people had voted at one stop or by mail prior to Election Day. And then I have that same report dated November 28th, near the end of the canvass, only it now says that 7,696 more people had voted at one stop than previously reported. This can't be, because all early voting totals are supposed to be uploaded by 7:30 on election night. This was the issue behind those 90,000 late votes being added in Durham County that we talked about in the previous videos. You know, this is what swung the race from McCrory to Cooper. I mean, how could it be that those 90,000 absentee votes were unable to be counted on time on election night, but they were available to be included in the November 6th report? Bingo! You got it. One is front-end numbers, those in the report based on how many people had voted, and the other is back-end numbers, those added in late on election night that reflect how many votes each candidate's received. You know, interestingly, among the same two reports, it also now shows that 36,301 more people had somehow voted by mail prior to Election Day than was originally reported at the close of early voting in the November 6th report. Remember what I said about uploading backdated records. Now, this slide shows who benefited the most from the subjective approval of late arriving absentee by mail ballots and the provisional ballots awaiting verification and tabulation. You see, there were four races that the Democrats had to hold on to or win in November: Governor, Attorney General, State Auditor, and Secretary of State, in order to gain complete control over our elections. Now, it should come as no surprise, as you can see, that these four races changed the most during the canvass. And I think we're beginning to connect the dots between transactions on the front end and data manipulation on the back end. I know it's tedious and complicated and even overwhelming at times, but do bear with me for a few more minutes. But again, somebody managed to squeeze 50,846 votes out of only 36,859 ballots. It's fraud. It's theft. And this is where the data manipulation becomes undeniable. Now, as I comb through the records, I look for signs of two things: what's there that shouldn't be, and also what's missing that should be there. And it should hardly come as any surprise to you by now that I found clear evidence of both. By sorting the results file, as you can see here, and arranging the lines from the smallest to the largest totals, I found negative numbers. Yeah, you heard me right. Negative numbers. And I ask you, what ballot can you cast that generates a negative number for any candidate? There isn't one. But the record clearly suggests somehow someone did. Or they doctored the numbers. I mean, what amount of addition can you do among a pool of positive integers and get a negative sum as the result? Now, I'm no math whiz, but not even Common Core math gets away with that. You know, two races were affected in one county, Rutherford County, and the numbers appear only in the write-in miscellaneous category. But it proves not only that the system allows them, it doesn't even sound an alarm when they do exist, and it proves no one is checking close enough to even see when it's there. Now, what we do see here could well be what we would call in the military a soft probe, an attempt to detect a weakness and exploit it to see what could be done that might go undetected. I mean, after all, it was done in a very benign way that did not affect the outcome of any race. They used multiple voting types and methods, and it used multiple race types. In this case, federal and local. It also minimized the potential consequences if detected because of the lack of real impact on the outcome. Or, this could be the residual of an incomplete purge of similar data left behind after totals were altered and tabulated. Now, do you still think no one has played fast and loose with the numbers? Remember when I showed you earlier how those 38 statewide candidates have such differing numbers between the results file and the official tally? Folks, this isn't clerical error. It's not a computer glitch. It was intentional, and it's criminal. And this should be of concern to every registered voter in North Carolina and across the nation. Because if it's happening here, I'm sure it's happening in all those other states that use the same contract vendors for our elections hardware, software, ballot printing, and system maintenance. Now seriously, do you want to still hang on to that worn-out talking point that voter fraud doesn't exist?
then explain to me how not every candidate in a race got credit for votes in all precincts from a given county while their challengers did. Yep, that's right. That happened too. And just as I said was the case with the absentee file, no single record tells the whole story. It's not until you line things up next to each other that the hidden meanings come out. So I did something similar with the results file. I put the results sorted by contest, by county, and by precinct in each race next to each other. Now, what I expected to find in a statewide race, like the Commissioner of Labor here, for example, was 2,704 lines of precinct totals, since that's how many precincts we have here in the state. Instead, I found there are 3,209 different lines of precinct level totals to be tallied up. That's 505 more distinct and separate lines of data than we have precincts. And each one carries the same weight as if it were its own precinct full of voters. When I began segregating them by description and taking out those I could tell was a physical precinct, it became readily apparent that not only were some counties bundling results together for things like absentee, provisional, transfer, or curbside ballots to get a composite total, but some counties, as we show here, right here in Mecklenburg, were also splitting the bundled ballot types into subgroups of bundled precinct groups for reporting purposes. They couldn't make the waters muddier if they tried. Now, this makes it all but impossible to determine at any point prior to the final results certification if any precinct had more votes cast than they had registered voters on the books. Data in that format obscures far more than it reveals. And in this slide shows Guilford County, for example, using an entirely different scheme of bundling. But it has become apparent that this commingling of data keeps us from seeing just where the totals came from. So I asked you, why are the votes showing up only in the male column here for these candidates and none from the other types of ballots in that respective bundled group? Smoke and mirrors, folks. Pay no attention to the left hand while the right hand keeps you entertained. Now, in fact, as you can see here, only 25 counties report the same number of precincts, the same number of results lines as they have precincts. Another 69 counties use anywhere from 1 to 10 additional lines. There are 15 additional lines in Mecklenburg, 16 in Durham, 20 in Pitt, and Buncombe with 23. 26 more lines are used in Cumberland County. And yet, probably to no one's surprise, topping the list, 69 additional lines used by Wake County to blend their numbers. Now, whatever happened to the statutory requirement that our system be uniform? The State Board of Elections has clearly failed miserably on this mandate. Did you know that the state statute that gives the Board of Elections its authority actually exempts it from any direct external oversight? The truth is, they answer to no one, except occasionally the legislature, which until recently, as you know, was controlled by the Democrats who set it all up this way. Now, as an aside, and since we're talking about uniformity, or rather the gross lack of it, I even discovered in the results file for the 2012 general election a ballot status called accumulated. Now, I checked it, and it doesn't appear in any other general election between 2008 and 2016. It's not absentee, it's not provisional, not transfer, not curbside. Accumulated. Now, it didn't appear in every county, but it begs the question of whether counties can simply make up ballot categories on the fly and call them anything they want. I mean, what is an accumulated ballot? It sounds like a case of, well, we have a bunch of ballots here and we want to get them counted and we don't know where to stick them, so we'll make up a name and add them in that way. Now, friends, how in the world can you write a single ballot tabulation program to accurately account for all of these seemingly arbitrary variations? I think it's a great question. Many of my computer literate friends would say you can't, and I think they'd be right. Now, the state board will tell you that they have to go back in after the election and put all of those bundled ballots back in the right precincts. and that it puts a strain on them to do it when the legislature trimmed their time allowed for doing so from 60 days to 30 days. Now, folks, I know I'm not the brightest bulb in the chandelier, but the system already knows which precinct every voter is registered in. Those back-end numbers on that ballot are tied back to the data to that precinct where the voter's registered. And how do we know this? Because they're able to report almost immediately how many of these votes came from each demographic category by political party, by gender, by age, by race, by ethnicity, and we're somehow supposed to believe that sorting it based on one additional data element in the same record somehow becomes so cumbersome as to take a whole month or more to complete? I think not. It shouldn't take any longer than whatever time it takes to run a proper query of that data to correlate each vote back to the precinct of origin and to tabulate it on that basis, just as they do with all the other demographics. And this is where the data manipulators fell short. That 13,987 ballot shortfall in the council state races just proves that these weaknesses in the system and what they can allow. It also proves you don't even need to bother with camouflage if no one is looking in your direction. And the truth is, there simply weren't enough ballots to cover all of those added back-end votes on the days they needed to show up in the record. And even they didn't catch their own mistake. The trouble is, no one's ever bothered previously to look at it this way. You know, the numbers, I believe, tell us a story. The answers are there if we will only ask the right questions of it. But sadly, friends, these numbers will never answer the unasked question. They've left a trail of crumbs that needs to be followed to the very end. Now, by now, you probably heard of the 168 ballots from Bladen County that have been determined to have all been signed by the same 6 people. And as you can see here in the next slide, it's clear that isn't their only problem. You see, not every candidate got credit for votes in every precinct, or to be more correct, every precinct level line of data. Here in the Labor Commissioners Contest, for example, I aligned the 4 candidates' totals beside each other after sorting it by county and precinct. It didn't take long as I scrolled down through it before the alignment of the lines was thrown off. And as you can see, I had to add 5 lines into Brian Wayne's column at one point to bring the following lines back into alignment. The lines from Bladen County's early voting sites for him were simply not in the report. They show up for Barry, for Meeker, in the write-in miscellaneous category, but not for Brian Wayne. Now, it's not like they were just showing 0 votes. They're missing. They're not there. And what kind of tabulation program can count some lines for 3 candidates in a race and not for a 4th? I guess it's easy if the lines have been removed. But can it be as simple as removing lines from the report, or did the deletion occur in the original data file or machine tapes at the local level? Now, clearly that's beyond me to determine, but I hope you'll all agree that this calls for a full-blown autopsy of this data and the database it came from in all 100 counties. And I found other instances of missing lines. It wasn't just Bladen. You know, I kept, even within Bladen, though, there were more instances further down, and there was evidence of deletions in other races in even more counties, including the presidential contest. But folks, this suggests the alternative possibility that the deletion was done at a more central, not county level, or perhaps a combination of both. But if the doctoring of the records was done locally, then it proves the state lacks the ability to catch incomplete reports when they're submitted. And if the doctoring was at the state level, well, then we have corruption at the highest levels of our system. Now, on May 4th of this year, State Board of Elections Director Kim Strack gave a presentation to the North Carolina House Standing Committee on Elections and reassured those committee members that their post-election audits at both the state and county level had ensured that there were no indicators of errors in the way those provisional ballots were counted from one county to the next. And this is what she said.
So, result assurance. That's a good reason. You want to be confident that those results were accurate. People questioned those results in Durham County, that couldn't be right. There was a recount that was conducted just to show that it was right. We went beyond that and looked at looked at other data to ensure that everything had been appropriately done, and we believe that it was. So we accomplished this through a partnership with the County Board of Elections and the State Board of Elections. Counties do their own auditing. They do their own assurance that their results are accurate through canvassing. That's what that process is about. But we work with them in ensuring that their canvass is accurate. One of the ways we did that this year is we audited all the provisional data to ensure that counties were making consistent decisions about counting provisional ballots, so that one county was not counting provisionals that they shouldn't be, and a county would be counting votes that they shouldn't, or that counties were not counting ballots that clearly should be counted. And so we were able to find that 428 voters' ballots would not have been counted had we not conducted that audit and advised those counties that they needed to count those ballots. So that's a very important part, because sometimes this is not because counties were just being lazy or not doing the right thing. Sometimes they didn't have all the information, or they might have missed something. There might have been an error. So that's the way that we work together to ensure the results are accurate.
Well, that's nice, but the numbers tell an entirely different story. The data in the provisional file downloaded from their website shows a stark difference in the rate of approval between the counties. In fact, the range of percentages as computed here in this table shows that Vance County had a provisional ballot approval rate of only 8.46%, while Richmond County's rate of 70.04% is roughly 8 times as great. Uniformity? Consistency? Where did she get that idea? And again, all the data tells us many tales if we only ask the right questions of it. But up until now, no one has been, especially the Board of Elections. Now, if you study the chart, you can see that while the rates can vary in percentage far more easily in counties with a small number of ballots to process as compared to our 2 largest counties, Wake and Mecklenburg are on opposite ends of the approval spectrum, just as are the smaller counties like Vance and Richmond. And in the next slide, we can see an even different story emerging by looking at the actual numbers and not just percentages. No county had more than 900 provisional ballots to process, with the lone exception of Wake. Who's surprised? Yeah. Wake County approved 3,188, nearly 3.5 times as many as any other county. They approved 2,114 of those provisional ballots because of an unreported move. That means there were questions about jurisdiction and their eligibility to even vote in Wake County or in that particular precinct. That's right. 2/3 of their provisional ballots were approved despite those concerns, and they represent more than twice what any 2 other of the 99 counties had in total provisional ballots for all reasons combined. And they were also one of the last counties to declare their results official, and this is what put Cooper's lead beyond the 10,000 vote threshold to avoid an automatic recount and force Governor McCrory's concession. Thank you, Wake County. You gave the governor's mansion to Cooper. Was it an exercise in partisan discretion, perhaps? Well, who controls politics in Wake County? Democrats. And I'm not talking about who sits on the Board of Elections there either. You see, once you concede, the numbers no longer matter. All you have to do is create the illusion with the back-end numbers that you have the votes, and you also have enough front-end numbers to give you the cover for it. And it all makes perfect sense on its face until you look at the win factor. And that is where the fraud is revealed. The bottom line is that there simply weren't enough ballots left to be counted after Election Day to justify the additional votes they claim were legitimately cast. Someone altered the numbers. And there's no other obvious or reasonable explanation for it. Now, whether they did it with negative numbers or whether they did it by removing lines of results, whether it was done at the county level or at the state level, those are all things demanding a full and complete criminal investigation by the appropriate authorities who have the necessary computer forensic capability that I simply don't have. I mean, who do we turn to now? Roy Cooper? I don't think so.
He didn't do anything as Attorney General. He's not going to do anything as Governor. Josh Stein, his chosen replacement as Attorney General. Nah, I don't think so. Beth Wood, State Auditor. No. You know, all of them stood to benefit from this scheme, and each one of them now has an inherent conflict of interest. You know, certainly not Elaine Marshall, our Secretary of State, who grants the notary public commissions, enabling people to certify those absentee ballots. Oh, that's right. Didn't you hear? The legislature's already called for her resignation for granting notary commissions to 320 illegal aliens or face impeachment. And she did so under an advisory opinion from then Attorney General Roy Cooper. She actually got the most votes of any other Democrat on the ballot, including Cooper. And she got 178,000 more votes than Hillary Clinton did. You know, well, so much for down ballot drop-off. But folks, this is unprecedented in our elections history. If you don't smell a rat by now, there's nothing I could ever tell you that's going to change your mind. But let me ask you, did you pick up on the common element in the four names I just mentioned? This brings us to another critical factor in why things turned out as they did. Because you see, those four were must-win seats the Democrats had to keep or win in November above any other. 3 hold the statutory or constitutional authority and duty to investigate voter fraud. That's the governor, the attorney general, and the state auditor. Marshall holds the final key with the notary commissions. Now, I'm not suggesting that any of them had a direct hand in what happened or were even aware of what was going on, but clearly it was done by people working on their behalf. The election made sure that the Foxes continue to own and guard the henhouse. Now, in closing, let me say that I've become convinced and remain convinced that the systemic weaknesses in our elections data system afford an abundance of opportunities that can be exploited to manipulate an outcome well after the last ballot has been cast and counted. And I believe the information that I presented here more than backs that up. And I hope by now you agree. And true, this is only a summary. The spreadsheets number in the dozens and the printed pages of findings in the hundreds. It's far too much to pass along here. But it's all been provided to the General Assembly in Raleigh for their action. And I'm glad to follow up with any of you who may have additional questions. Now, as I've traveled the state during these same few months to speak to many of the grassroots conservative groups about my findings, I can say without hesitation that on the days when I was ready to just throw in the towel, just how much the support and encouragement so many of you have offered during this time has meant to me. If anything, I've proven only that there is good and sufficient reason to investigate all of this far more deeply than my time and personal resources allow. You know, now I admit I have withheld some information intentionally from this video, only because of the potential for such a release to jeopardize any future criminal proceedings. That information does not contradict in any way what I presented here, but rather points even more clearly to just who is behind all of this, and it even reinforces my conclusions about the data manipulation. I just don't want to give anybody who might face criminal charges any additional opportunity to cover their tracks. Now, I don't think anyone counted on somebody having printed out and saved all of those periodic reports showing the daily total changes as we went along, or tracking the daily reports during the early voting period as I did. They disappear from the website once the newest update has been uploaded. And I don't think anyone expected someone to actually look at the records side by side for comparison. But whatever the outcome of this, if anything, when we all go back to the polls this fall for the municipal elections, whoever did this will know we're watching. And now we know where to look and what to look for. Now, I'm specifically requesting that the legislature amend North Carolina General Statute 163-182, which empowers the State Board of Elections, so that it provides for independent oversight of their activities and data to gain more uniformity in the system, and to remove their exemption from what is known as the Chapter 150B rulemaking procedures imposed on every other department of state government. And for the record, the bold type in this slide is my emphasis added to those portions. Folks, currently, they really answer to no one. every action they propose should be subject to a public notice and comment before their actions are taken, not as a mere matter of public information after the fact. I'm also going to recommend that they consider as an alternative to photo voter ID that we merely do what many public schools are already doing to record visitors. You know, you go to visit a school, you log in at the school office on a laptop, it takes your photo, it prints it out on a label, and that becomes your visitor's badge. Laptops, labels, and label printers are already available in each precinct for printing the barcode label that's affixed to the authorization to vote form. So only minor tweaking of this system is being needed to capture these images with that voter's record. The cost would be minimal, and tweaking it to accommodate curbside voting is easily done because we know laptops are inherently portable. Voila, no ID needed. You capture the photo for future comparison, you place that label on the authorization to vote form, and it also helps reconcile those cases where, for example, mothers and daughters or fathers and sons with the same name have erroneously been given the other's ballot to vote, causing the other one to show up as having already voted when they present themselves at the poll. And of course, it also helps identify who's impersonating someone for subsequent prosecution. I think most impersonation would simply cease. It would also shift the entire discussion of having a photo ID from one of being an unreasonable burden imposed by government on citizens of meager means to obtain one, to one of there being a direct benefit to the voter of ensuring no one else substitutes a ballot in their place. It's a very low-cost solution to voter ID that avoids both any significant capital investment as well as the costly and guaranteed lawsuits over it. Now, I'm also recommending that since the bulk of our hardware is at or near the end of its expected life cycle, and since we are slave to a sole source contract, that we scrap the entire system as it exists and replace it with one obtained through a competitive bid process on the open market to gain the best system at the lowest cost for our state. You know, frankly, friends, most of us have more computing power in our smartphones than these boxes need to count votes. We can and must do better, and we can do so for far less than what we are currently paying. You know, I firmly believe that if we all stand together on this, we can work with the legislature to ensure that our future elections are not tainted by these kinds of inconsistencies and discrepancies. Now, it won't be easy. Many remain convinced there's still nothing wrong at all with our election system. You know, and in fact, during that same presentation by Ms. Strack on May the 4th, the House Elections Committee Vice Chair, Representative Mickey Michaud from Durham County, made the following observation on just how well he thought she and her staff were doing. Let's take a listen.
North Carolina ought to be proud of itself for having the type of voting machinery, voting applications that it has without all of the problems that have been witnessed in other places. And Ms. Strack, Mr. Bartlett, you go all the way back to all of the executive directors of the State Board of Law Examiners and found that these people have been fair and have operated the system in a just manner. We got no business interfering with the operation of something that moved. If everything in our government moved as smoothly as our State Board of Elections has moved over the years, we'd be a perfect state.
Really, Representative Michaud? A perfect state? I mean, with all due respect, sir, that's hogwash. Clearly it isn't true from what I've uncovered, and I am sure I've only scratched the surface of a much larger problem. Yet many like him just have that same compelling need to believe. And I don't say that to be demeaning, because we all want to have faith in our government. You know, who knows what the remaining 2.7 million records in that absentee file will reveal that I haven't gone through yet? Who knows what looking at all the other down-ballot races in the same way will reveal? I simply have not had the time to look at the 120 state House races, or the 50 state Senate races, or the hundreds of judicial and local races on ballot, or any of the referendums. But resolving this should not be a partisan issue. Let's all work towards that end. I'm going to keep digging on my end anyway, since there's still a few more leads that I need to follow up on with the data. But I hope you will keep in touch and stay informed so that we can all do whatever may arise for us to do as this resolution process unfolds. Now, hopefully by now you understand why I said from the beginning to set aside everything you ever thought you knew about voter fraud. I think there's a reason some people want us to think of it only in those previous terms. But I hope you'll agree that anything shorter in this video would not have told the entire story. I sincerely appreciate you investing so much of your valuable time to watch this through to the end. Now, I expect I'll be making at least 2 more videos in coming weeks to address the additional topics of our broken system for protesting election irregularities and voter fraud, and another on the existing state contract and related issues concerning our elections hardware, software, maintenance, and ballot printing. This is where we get to follow the money, and no one should be surprised where it leads. We simply have to stop treating criminal misconduct as an administrative violation. Please like this video wherever you see it on social media and share it wherever you can. Those likes determine how often those sites promote and recommend it to others for viewing. Help spread the word. So until next time, thanks for watching, and as always, may God bless the United States, and may He continue to find us and the great state of North Carolina worthy of those same blessings. Have a great day.